most of you are familiar with some of the terminology we're talking about, but for those of you who are a little bit new to this, the question is, in a sense, what's, in terms of an individual holon and a collective or social holon, can't a collective or social holon have a collective consciousness that you can all experience as some sort of higher self? And it's very common to take, for example, almost any of the sort of expanding levels of complexity, whether systems theorists draw it, or deep ecologists draw it, or anything like that. It tends to go like this: atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, and it can be like families, tribes, all of humanity, all of the biosphere, all of the universe. So you get one nice sort of expanding thing like that. And the idea is that somehow beyond the individual, the next thing up is somehow, in the direct line, is some sort of collective thing. And when you go beyond the individual, you're experiencing this sort of group or collective awareness. It's somehow your higher self. And what I've said is that basically there are experiences like that, but it's a bad way to interpret it along one axis. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So, because what we do is we take the individual up to atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, individual. And that's the upper right and the upper left quadrants. And then corresponding with each of those is a collective. Now, we'll decide whether it's a collective consciousness and what that means, because that's the question you have. But there's a collective association of these individuals. So instead of having the social stacked on top of the individual, the social is a correlate of every single level of the individual, both exteriorly and interiorly. So we'll try to give some concrete examples, but let me give the two, and you've probably heard this, but I'll tell you just the theoretical problem with saying that individual and social are essentially similar. And this argument has been made by Wilber and Whitehead. It actually goes all the way back to, it's argument at least 1,000 years old. And with simple examples I always use, and I use two, one from the upper right and one from the lower left. My dog Daisy, when she decides to get up and walk across the room, 100% of her atoms, molecules, and cells get up and walk with her. It's not a democracy. They don't vote. Half of the cells go one way, half the cells go the other, and poor old Daisy's head kind of goes around the room. So that's what Wilber and Whitehead called a dominant monad. And don't freak out at the word dominant, those of you who are just getting over your green residue. All it really means is that when I raise my arm, look at that. I mean, it's really an astonishing feat when you think about it. I raise my arm. Do you know what it takes to get billions of cells, molecules, quarks, strings, and God knows what is down there to move when I simply say that? Now, the dominant monad in that case is my eye. So when I do that, that happens. So that's all individual holons have some capacity like that. And so even when we talk about molecules, when a molecule moves over here, all of its atoms, proteins, move with it. And it's really astonishing because it means you can get into the whole physics of it. There has to be a collapse of the wave packet for every single quantum event to make that happen. And what's actually doing that? Some form of will. And we can get into that. But notice the difference very quickly. 100% of atoms, molecules, and cells get up and move when the dominant monad says, do it. There is no social holon where that happens at all. So there's no, in other words, no group of people, no state, no tribe has a dominant monad such that if that dominant monad says, we all move, 100% of every single member in that culture gets up, jumps, moves left, da-da-da. It just doesn't happen. There is no dominant monad in a social holon. Now, what social holons have, where individual holons have a dominant monad, social holons have a dominant mode of discourse. They have a dominant type of communicating among their members. So Daisy is an example in the upper right. And now I'll give an example right now. In the lower left, where we have the lower right for us right now, we're a social holon. And the lower right consists of all of our physical bodies, located here in this one particular space, and all of the communication that's going between us. A social holon consists of its individual members and their exchanged artifacts. And so for us to have a social holon that's going to stay together and make some sort of sense, we have to be able to communicate and understand each other. A flock of geese is a simpler example of what we're doing. They're flying together. That's not a dominant monad. They don't all seem to go exactly what happens. But they communicate to each other in a way that they understand each other, and therefore they have some sort of social cohesion. So there's a dominant mode of discourse that goes, as far as I can understand it, quack, 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 quack. I'm working on that, but that's nice. In the lower, so right now we have a social holon whose lower right component is all of the physical interactions that we're having. Now remember, a social holon is not something out there. It's your lower right quadrant. There is a dimension of you right now that is being impacted by all of the physical sounds, all of the, what we say, signifiers, the words that are being exchanged between us. All of those are impacting on you all the time. That's your lower right quadrant. But the simple fact that words are hitting your ears doesn't mean that you understand them. I could be speaking Latvian. And same words, same physical things, same vibrations hitting your ears, and you have no idea what's going on. So we don't have a lower left quadrant unless we have mutual understanding. So the words that we exchange, you have to be able to understand. And if you do, then we have the lower left quadrant of mutual understanding starts to develop. And in the lower left quadrant, we develop a we. That's the definition of basically the lower left quadrant. So as long as we're starting to communicate here, as long as we can start to say we understand each other, then that we starts to form. And that we is very interesting, because that is that group consciousness. Now, we're not saying there isn't group consciousness. And in a minute, I'll try to explain what I think is your experience of a higher self or wisdom in a group. I'm just saying it's not the I of a group. It's your higher I being resonated in the higher I of the other group, and it's that dance in the lower left quadrant, that resonance of higher self-wisdom that takes you beyond yourself. But it's not the experience of the I of a group. And I'll give you an example right now. We're starting to develop a bit of a we, yeah? Kind of understand each other. So there's a we, but does that we have an I? Is there a single I such that when it says move, all of our understanding does exactly what it says? No. There is no I of we. That's why it's called we. The fascinating thing about a we is that it's this mutual dance. It's this extraordinary tango of I-thou relationships. And of all the mysteries in the universe, I mean, I is mysterious enough. Transcendental I, Atman, that's mysterious enough. It is mysterious enough. The fact that there's a universe arising is absolutely extraordinary. Much more extraordinary than that is that you and I understand each other. The mystery, and then maybe spirit is manifest in all four quadrants, but the one that is just a drop-dead mystery and miracle is that you and I find each other and understand each other. And that's extraordinary. So that's the dance of mutual understanding in the lower left. And when you get in a group that really is on the same wavelength, now that's important because social holons have a dominant mode of communication. Now, again, dominant, not a bad thing. All it really means is if we're going to understand each other, we have to be on the same wavelength. So let's be generous and say we're all talking turquoise. So if somebody in here wants to insist on talking blue or insist on talking orange, it's not that we're going to try to really marginalize them. We're just going to throw them out. But you see what I mean? It's just not going to work. And so it's not a bad thing that social holons have a dominant. It really means we all have to be on the same wavelength. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't talk higher or lower and so on. Nobody's suppressing that. But it's the same with geese. Geese are flying along going quack, 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 quack. If one of them goes bark, bark, meow, meow, it's not going to work. And you're not going to get a formation going. So the early pioneers of studying this, the postmodernists, Foucault and so on, took originally the kind of cranky view of it, which is because there has to be a wavelength that we all understand, then the bark, bark, and meow, meows, that the geese are going to oppress and marginalize the barkers and the meowers. And that's true. If the dominant mode of discourse, particularly in wavelengths that are blue, if you try being homosexual there, then your bark, bark, meow, meow, or hey, love the hairdo, that's going to get you hung. So there are ugly instances of that. But as a general rule, it's not a bad thing. So what's happening, though, is now we're sort of establishing a similar wavelength. And if you actually get people that are sharing a band of consciousness, it's very rare, and you start moving into, let's say, turquoise or even coral, and you're actually sharing that, then all of a sudden a resonance pattern can be set up that can take you beyond yourself. Not into the group I, there isn't one, but into your own higher self. Now, it's not the higher self of the group, it's a higher self elicited by the group. And if they're doing it right, they're finding their own higher self. And that's resonating. And at that point, because you can experience a oneness from your higher self and their higher selves, then it feels like the group I is somehow doing this for you. So I'm not saying your experience is wrong. I'm just saying when you come out of it and interpret it, maybe it's not a good idea to interpret it as the group has an I, because that gets you into trouble. It gets you into trouble in the following reason. And I don't mean this of you, but I'm being very serious here. The state, c'est moi. Okay? We know that? L'état, c'est moi. Yeah? Louis the Roman numeral something or other. The 14th. Every fascist has claimed to speak for the group and to claim that this consciousness is one. And whenever you get into that, then all of a sudden, if you know what the group I is, then you're speaking for everybody. And that's what can get into trouble on the downside of that. So you have to be very, very careful about that. As soon as you hear somebody say Gaia is one consciousness, and it has one I, and what Gaia once is, and then they fill in the blank, it is what their I wants. So that's fascism. And that's why ego-fascism is one of the downsides of that. In addition to the positive things, of course, that ecology has to offer, it's constantly lending itself to a Gaia is one organism. And then as soon as you say, yeah, what does Gaia want? And then you get filled in with what Gaia wants. And strangely, Gaia is a green meme organism. It's the strangest thing. So those are some of the just theoretical downsides. So my suggestion, just my own take on this, is that I think your experiences are very valid. I think people get it. It's like when you're in a tango sometimes, or you're just in some sort of partnership and you're just moving so in sync, it's like you're one. Yeah, it's like you're one. And the consciousness can overlap in a sense that that your higher self and that higher self is resonating for a moment. And it feels like oneself in that sense. But that's quite different from saying, therefore, there is a dominant monad in that we that controls that we. Do you see what I mean? So we have to be a little bit careful about that. And the whole thing about the 4 quadrants was a way to really follow the really, really careful philosophical work on this, like Alfred North Whitehead, and just make those separations. And then we can honor this extraordinary resonance that can occur in the lower left. I mean, you really can get so locked into some of this stuff in the very positive sense that it really is, you're all on the same wavelength. And at that point, boundaries disappear very quickly. And that's why all 4 quadrants is what we want to try to work on. And that's sort of the whole point about an integral approach. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Buddha is yourself and your individual I. Dharma is the truth, the it, the suchness of things that are arising. And Sangha is the intersubjective resonance that you feel with those who are on the same wavelength. And when all three of those match up, it's better than pizza.